Good afternoon and welcome to our roundtable episode of Talent and Growth. Thank you very much for listening today live. If you are tuned into the webinar, if you are, please feel free to pop any questions or points in the comments box on LinkedIn Live. And if it's relevant, I'll absolutely direct it to our speakers today. And if you are listening on Catch Up on the podcast, obviously you can't do that because it's not live. But thank you for listening all the same. So today we're talking about setting up a talent function from scratch. Now, of course, this would be a great episode or great conversation for someone who's about to go in to do this, but I think this could be really good for anybody who's involved in any kind of talent function, because you're going to learn about ways perhaps you can be doing things a little bit better or maybe doing things a little bit differently. And it's always good to hear around how other people strategize around how to go to work on this type of thing. So I'm going to get some introductions from our panel and also ask them just to briefly explain, I suppose, a little bit around their experience specific to this topic. And then, of course, we'll dive into the meaty detail as we go. So, Leah, if we could start with you, just who you are, what you're doing, just a little bit around, I suppose, your experience around this area. That'd be great.
Mm-hmm. So I'm Leah. I'm a French woman based in New York. I joined a tech startup 2.5 years ago. They're focusing on mobile app testing. And I'm the solo HR there. So I've been there for 2.5 years. So I worked on many topics that we're going to discuss today. And before that, I studied and worked in Seoul, in London, and Paris. And so I joined them when we were at the seed stage. And we've been actually acquired last week. So it's been some crazy weeks for all of us. And I'm going to help them for the transition to make them integrate in the bigger company and then find something else.
Exciting times. Thank you so much, Leah. Well, brilliant. Hannah, over to you. Same questions, please.
I'm Hannah. You nailed that one to start with. I'm currently based at Arenco. We are about a 70 head count at the moment, so we're not necessarily at the complete beginning of setting up the talent function, but we're at a point where we're now transitioning into, I suppose, through the growth phase and how we adapt the talent function accordingly. I've previously been in similar organizations at this stage, but also much earlier in the process as well. So I've gone into an organization kind of sub 20 head count where there's no talent function whatsoever and taken it right from scratch. But also been exposed, I guess, to sort of the other end of it through some mergers and acquisitions, which is more about adapting the talent function that already exists and how to consolidate a number of talent functions that are spread across different businesses and how to bring them into one new function. So quite a lot of different areas of the journey. Hopefully that will bring some insight today. We'll see.
I'm absolutely sure it will. Thank you so much, Hannah. And last but not least, Ollie.
Hi, I'm Ollie. I lead the talent function here at Runa. We're a fintech scale up. We've developed a payments platform. I joined Runa in May 2021 as the first talent hire when we were about 40 people. Over the past 2 years, we've gone through new funding rounds, which has obviously fueled our growth, and we're at about 140 now. And during that time, I've had the opportunity to build the talent team across initially tech and then commercial, up to 8 people. Whilst going through that journey, looked at and brought in different solutions, like embedded models to facilitate that gap in the meantime. And yeah, we're now a team of 7 across tech and commercial. So hopefully I can kind of add some value in terms of this discussion. What's gone well, what hasn't, what we've learned along the way. Excited to join the conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, I'm sure everyone can agree we're in safe hands today with our panelists. So thank you all for joining us. So, Ollie, let's stick with you. We'll dive into the questions. So typically, when we're at this point where we're thinking, right, we are going to build a talent function from scratch, that probably means the business that we're in or we're joining is scaling quickly and they need to attract top people. So bearing in mind that's usually the context, what are the key steps and priorities for you that we need to consider when starting this function from scratch?
So I think taking a more idealistic approach to it is that hopefully when you're assessing and you're looking at the plans and the growth plans of the business, you can spend some time. And what's really important is spending time on what that headcount plan looks like over the course of a year, building kind of a forecast hiring model, breaking that down into kind of a quarterly period, so that you can really assess not only when you want to be kicking off, but also looking at when you need people to start in, and agreeing that from a budget standpoint, agreeing that with your exco team and the business sponsors within that. I think what another important aspect of it is to assess the historic kind of data, which I think we'll just touch on a little bit more later on. But once you've got that plan, you can then really identify who you're going to need, when you're going to need them, and using the data that you can gather as well, that historic data, you can plan what the timelines are to hire these people, when they're going to be in, and how much resource you need to allocate to that. So for me, that was the key thing, so that you can really try as best you can to create kind of a foolproof, scalable model for long-term success.
Is it feasible to do this when, say, just stick with you on this one, Ollie, just a follow-up question. Is it feasible to do what you're saying when we need to really hit the ground running? Because often we're at this point, we're like, hang on, we need 20 people yesterday.
In this situation, I think that's often the case. And it's and that's still consistent now for us, is that we can, we'd hire people yesterday if we could. I think the thing to appreciate and understand as a sole talent person within a business that needs to scale quickly is that you can't do everything yourself, and you need to utilize different models and different resources to be able to plug that gap in the short term whilst you're planning in the long term. So don't overload yourself in terms of doing the strategic elements, as well as being hands-on, as well as doing the sourcing and managing stakeholders. Like, take the top half of that, take the project management view of it, manage the stakeholders, and get support elsewhere, whether it be agencies, whether it be an embedded model, so that you can really start to hit that market early.
Cool, thanks, Ollie. Leah, let's go to you on that. Is there anything else you'd think, or anything from your own perspective, that you think we need to be thinking about in this situation?
So yeah, I totally agree with what Ollie said. Something I could add probably is, for me, that was key when I joined Waldo, the startup that I'm working on. It's to have a very good alignment with the hiring managers and the founders, clearly define what they're looking for, because sometimes they don't know what they're looking for. So you cannot just invent, or you really have to have key metrics, the roadmap, when do we need these people, and exactly what they're going to do. So I think that was key for me. And then you need to, I guess, especially once you want to scale, you need to go fast. I guess the learn fast, fail fast is a bit cliche, but this is really something that we all been through, I guess. You always need to iterate. So if something is not right, something is not working, just don't spend too much time on it, and just move on, start a new strategy. And yeah, don't be shy to start all over again.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and it's a good point you make. I think the element of it's important in most situations, but certainly in this situation, that we identify what the problem is that the hiring managers have, rather than just go with what they perceive the solution to be. Because their solution may be, let's hire 5 people, and it might be, well, actually, you hire 3 people and take these 2 people from over here, and then that's going to be the better way to do it. So I think that is really, really key. Hannah, anything to add from you on this one before we move on to, I suppose, the next element?
I think everything that we've heard is super relevant. The only thing, I guess, that I would add is we have this tendency, when particularly we're completely alone in the role, to kind of panic and think, I'm an island of a talent function. And that's actually the complete opposite to the way we should be treating it. So I think taking the time to identify the correct support network to deliver this really early is key. And what I mean by that is both potentially, to Ollie's point, external support network, whether that is, an RPO model, whether that's working with agencies, or whether that is identifying and building relationships, to Leah's point, with the people inside the business that are going to support this function. So if I look at the external point of view, I don't have time, if I'm a sole talent manager, to articulate the culture of our organization or the mission of our organization to a new recruiter every single time. What I want to do is invest time at the beginning, identifying the right partner, and then educating them to the point where they know almost as much as I do about our business. They're a complete extension of me. So when I need support, it's a case of me saying, hey, I need to replace Bob, and they know who Bob is. They know who Bob reports to. They know exactly what Bob's role is. They understand what Bob's team needs, if Bob needs an expansion of the team, and they're really an extension of me already. So identifying that support network really early, internally identifying who the champions are within the business. We all know there are hiring managers that will do the absolute bare minimum to get their hire in, and they will expect a lot from you as your talent function. But we also know there's some real champions in the business that will drive your message. They will share your LinkedIn posts. They will send you people from their network. So identifying internally who's going to champion your message as well, and working collectively, and realizing that you're not necessarily an island, even though you are a lone talent manager at that point.
Yeah, 100% agree. So setting aside that time at the beginning to forge relationships with suppliers, agencies, vendors or whatnot, and internally is going to really pay off later on, because, relationship building, stakeholder management is such a key part. And Hannah, just staying with you on this one. So let's talk about candidate experience. We've run whole webinars on this topic, but I think it's worth dipping into. So how can organizations at this kind of stage they're at, where they're just setting up this function and presumably you're the person doing it, how can we start looking at candidate experience and taking into consideration all the things that we need to in terms of different regions and cultures and whatnot to make sure that candidate experience is a good one for the hiring process?
I think the first thing, and everyone's probably already aware of this, is just be really, really clear in managing expectations. If I can say at point of advert, or if I can articulate to the recruiter so that message lands as soon as they speak to a candidate, what we want our process to be, then they have an expectation of who they'll speak to, the tone of the conversation, the length of the conversation. But also, I think people are really, really forgiving if you're honest about where you're at in your journey. So I think it's totally fine to say, we're not perfect. We actually want your feedback from this. This is what we expect the process to look like. This is what we will ideally aspire to have achieved by the end of the process. But we are a new organization. We're still in the process of training our hiring managers. We're still adapting what the process and the policy will look like. It may fluctuate at some points, but I think taking the time afterwards to get the candidate feedback and allow space for that is how you perfect it moving forward. But I think that the biggest thing is managing expectations, but doing it super honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. Ollie, in terms of that candidate experience piece, I suppose similar question, but also how if you're going into a function to kind of set this up and a business to set this up, how high up the list of priorities is that candidate experience? Or is that something we start refining a bit later on? We've got some other things done.
It's front and center. I think it's something that's incredibly important, because if you're not getting your candidate experience right, then the rest of the efforts that you're making from a hiring perspective could be wasted, because you're going through the process of interviewing and offering and things like that, and really your candidate experience is really what kind of sells you as an organization, right? And look, we're a startup. We still are a startup. I came in when we were Series A. We're still very much building the plane as we're flying, right? So you can't. It's not as simple as and as theoretical to say do it all at the beginning. But I think coming into a talent function and making sure that the first part of your role is really around discovery and understanding what things look like and how things work, and certainly from a process standpoint, and investing that time with your hiring managers, with the process itself to form that defined process for a particular role, will then set the foundations for you to have a good candidate experience. So it's very important. It shouldn't be an afterthought. And certainly from our standpoint, from a talent team, we had an offsite last week whereby it was something that was that we measure and present back to the business from a CMPS standpoint. So taking that to the next level, really, and I would always say it should be front and center of a plan from a talent perspective.
Okay, we're prioritizing candidate experience. We're doing it. We're going to make it better. Leah, what for you are the first things you're going to do to make sure this is on point?
I'd say the most important, just to sum up a little bit what Hannah and Oli said, is to be really, flexible and transparent from the beginning with the candidates. So, for example, I hired mostly engineers, so we really looked for the best of the best, and these people, they have ton of options. If you want the best of the world, they have ton of options. No matter the economic market, no matter the layoffs, no matter what's going on, they're gonna have ton of choices. So you want to be as much flexible as you can with them, meaning that if you need to spend 3 weeks to do a hiring process, we're going to spend 3 weeks. You need 48 hours to get an offer. Okay, I'm going to make sure that my team is aware that we're all on it. And if we want you, we're going to get you. And then regarding the transparency, exactly what Hannah said, share the good, the bad, and the ugly. Obviously, we were a very small startup. I joined them as the 12th employee, where we've been until probably 26 employees at one point. And so, yeah, we're small. It's messy. You don't expect the same processes as in a bigger enterprises. So yeah.
Fantastic. And Leah, so your business wants the best of the best. Software engineers, always tough to get. So that's the bread and butter. That's why probably someone's brought you in to set this function up so you can get the best of the best. How are you going to effectively manage all the other things like hiring, onboarding, employee engagement, candidate experience? How are you going to work out how to prioritize what things and probably deliver it all? Because that might be what your stakeholders are expecting, everything at once.
So yeah, as we said a bit before, you cannot do everything perfectly and you cannot do everything on your own. So make sure that you have your team speaking about your culture, your co-founders speaking about your employer brand online, making sure all during the hiring processes, everybody knows what they need to do. Everybody is involved in the process. Make sure that you have a lot of support around you. And then it really depends on the roadmap. I really feel that depending on my OKRs for the quarter, is my priority attracting talent? Is my priority taking care of people? And then you really need to balance this. You cannot do everything at once. So I think the key to not get burnout is really to prioritize and make sure that what are your OKRs and that they are aligned with the companies, obviously.
Fantastic. Okay. So Hannah, moving on, what are some of the, and I love finding out about new tech and things to make my life easier, as I'm sure a lot of people are. So is there any, what are the essential tools, platforms, tech that you would take with you into a new business to set up a talent function that you think are must-haves? And of course, I'm sure there's a few new additions to this list with the influx of AI and the impact that's having. So is there anything that, you 2 or 3 must-haves?
So I think that there's 2 ways of looking at this. You can absolutely have all singing, all dancing, and best case scenarios, you've got the money and the resource to implement all of that as soon as possible. But there's also a trap of falling into this want and desire to have everything and forgetting that actually having a few really solid basic pieces in place that you can scale up with you is actually is also an equally acceptable method of I suppose combining your people aspect of this with your tech aspect of this. Mm-hmm. The one thing that I would say is it's a super important decision, and I've been with Arenco for a short period of time now, but what we have identified is the tech that we've got in place isn't suitable now, and had that decision, I suppose, been made in a slightly different way, we wouldn't have this extra workload of now migrating across to something else, but also the amount of manual work that we have to do now, and as a small people function, that's hugely draining on your time, doesn't compare to the additional cost that it would have been to have that functionality. So you could fall into the trap of having too much, but you can also fall into the trap of very early saying, we're strapped for resource, we don't have the cash, and taking the bare minimum. Your time is money, and especially if you are a single person running a talent function, you want to be able to pull a report in 20 minutes, not have to manually pull that data in 3 hours, for example. So I think there are a ton of things that we could go into in terms of different AIs and different softwares, but I think the important mentality around this is your decision making first and foremost. One thing from a diversity and inclusion perspective, if you have the ability to anonymize this process, then you can talk about that, which I think is really important. From an early stage, I would encourage that as much as possible. The other thing from a diversity and inclusion process perspective in the process, I would really strongly encourage you to use a gender decoder for your language, because this is something that's really, really hard to do as an individual person. I'm a female. It's going to stand to reason that my linguistics are probably more naturally female. If I'm dealing with a hiring manager that sits in a role with a predominantly male team that construct that job description or that advert with me, it's going to stand to reason that the language is more suitable to a male audience. Or, for example, if they come from a different cultural background from me, then there is going to be an element of that. So if you've got some software in place, and there's lots of free resources to do this as well, I would definitely encourage running it through some software that can help with those things that your human eye just doesn't instinctively pick up on.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think there's Gender Decoder. There's a couple of free platforms you can use to put in adverts. You ChatGPT, you can do it as well. I think, which is pretty good. So yeah, cool. Thanks, Hannah. And I think that mentality aspect of don't try and find a tool to make your life easy with everything. I think that's important. I think an important message. Ollie, Desert Island discs time, but we're not taking discs. We're taking software. What are we taking with us?
Well, I don't know if the others are a bit like me, but coming in, you had a kind of a Google sheet and a very basic ATS, and it was really diving into the weeds to understand where the business was, based on historic data. And I think the important thing is evaluate the problem that you need to solve before you get blinded by all of the new technology. There are things that will solve the problem, but don't be too swayed by things if there isn't a necessary need for it. As I say, we joined at Series A. We didn't have budget to throw behind all of these tools and technologies, but where it did become a case to make and where the business plan came in is because the time evaluation against the cost and how that was going to help moving forward. Tools that we found really useful, and it touches on the diversity side as well as the inclusivity. We use a tool called Evidenced for our interview recording, and what that enables us to do is remove bias from our process. We can use it for interview training for the interviewers that we've got, and it's something that features a lot within our bar raiser model, so people will go through that process. It also integrates it with your ATS, and you can use it as a tool when it takes the I can't think of the word. Essentially, it takes your notes for you. What's the word? I can't think of it.
Transcript.
Yeah, transcription. Yeah, so it's got that. Yeah. So that's been something that's really useful. Great platform there, and you can analyze all your data on it. The other one that we found really useful from an onboarding, and touching on your last question, from an onboarding and a candidate net promoter score is Screenloop. So we've used that for our CMPS and our automated onboarding. So it means that it can kind of take some of the automated tasks away from the people team, and then focus on the bigger ticket items and lean in on that as and when need be. But for me, they're outside of your standard, your ATS and things like that. They're two tools that have certainly been things that have enabled us from a talent functions perspective.
And just so I'm clear, we've Evidenced, so presumably it transcribes the interview and then gives advice as to what things could have been said or done differently. Is that what you mean?
Less so advice in terms of it, but it analyzes the kind of the talk time. You can then make notes in terms of what was positive, what was negative during the interview, any flags, anything you want to skip back to, and then ultimately it produces a video, produces all of the data. You can click on certain points of it to be able to jump to various points. On the transcription, you can click on the point you asked the question, it takes you straight to that point. So it's very good for us when we're reviewing a whole process, or if we're reviewing feedback, so that we can more objectively assess against feedback and make sure that it's valid.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah, I'm playing around at the moment with MetaView and Otter. MetaView being a transcribing platform purely for recruitment, and so it summarizes your candidate conversation with the questions. You've got ChatGPT, whatever element built in, so you can ask it, "Oh, what did I say here? What happened there?" It also gives you, once you've built up quite a bit of data, you can then like. It'll start saying giving you kind of feedback on how long your interviews are, how much percentage of the time you're spending talking compared to them. That's really cool. Otter I used anyway, and I use that to record podcasts as well. Put the transcript into that. So I use it for candidate interviews, and it does the same thing. You can summarize how your candidate interview went, and you can ping that over to the line manager. But I also use it for the podcast. So I can even almost go, I haven't published this yet, but I could put this transcript, this conversation into Otter, and it would then, I say, now write me a blog about it. It'll write me a blog about it like that. So it's pretty handy as well. And Screen Loop. So that is in onboarding you mentioned. So that is, you mentioned, I suppose, the screening side, but is it presumably with candidate experience and keeping them engaged as well, or is it just checking?
They do offer a similar platform as well from an interview recording perspective, but from the CMPS side, it integrates into the ATS, and essentially, if somebody is successful, then it will send out an automated survey and give you a score with a really well presented dashboard. And look, on the other side as well, I think you're only as good as the learnings that you have, right? And how you put them into action. So we wanted to understand the good, the bad, and the ugly, and when things have gone wrong, more so when things have gone right, so we can do something about it. So breaks it down in a really good way. You have a score, you can benchmark yourself against other companies, which is really useful. So yeah, that's on the CMPS side, and it's something that we factor into our kind of monthly and quarterly reporting to our exco. And then on the referencing, the referencing can generally be quite a manual, laborious process, and this kind of takes that and has lots of features around that as well that can really enhance the process.
Cool, thanks, Ollie. Leah, any software tech that you're taking with you for this?
The really essential ones for me were definitely Notion at first. I've been a huge fan of Notion. We used to do so much on Notion actually, and for a few months we only had that at the beginning. Then of course agreed implementing an ATS as soon as you can. We used Greenhouse. It's definitely something really important to make sure that you keep your pool of candidates, which we didn't really do on Notion. Now we have ChatGPT, LinkedIn obviously are key. We used a bit Interstellar for automated emails that you can also personalize. Obviously this is key. And then I know that Oli, you shared a software regarding candidate experience. I can't remember the name, but we used Guide at Waldo. It's basically a kind of gamified thing where a candidate has a personalized hiring process. So you have the name, you have their team, you have and each step gets unlocked after a new interview. It's linked it's integrated in your ATS. So when you change someone to a new interview, the guide automatically gets updated. The candidate receives it, and he knows or she knows what to expect in the next step.
Is anybody using anything for sourcing, like Sourcewell, Gem, anything like that?
Yeah, I use the Interstellar, basically. That's kind of the same as Gem.
Got you. Okay.
And yeah, it gets your emails from LinkedIn.
And it does like the sequencing and stuff like that. Does it do
Yes.
that? Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I've just started using Sourcewell. It's really good. And I personally, I hope I don't get thrown off LinkedIn, but I'm just sick of LinkedIn Recruiter, and I just think it just doesn't have the same impact anymore. Emails are just, people are sick of them. Whereas you get emails are so much more powerful. When you get the sequencing set up, it makes your life a lot easier. Okay, Leah, let's talk branding. So what strategies can we create to get that strong employer brand out there that's going to attract all those tough people you're trying to get in contact with?
So from my experience, especially at the seed stage when I joined, I think nobody knows you. Nobody knows your company. So your big piece of employer brand are definitely your employees. They will speak around them about how you do things, how you treat them. And the best hires that you can get, at least from my experience at the very beginning of this type of stage, are the referrals. So definitely treat your people right, and they will make sure to bring amazing people in your company. And then we invested at one point in some employer brand platforms like Built-in, The Muse. You have also Welcome to the Jungle, more in Europe. I think these are great pieces that can help you to make sure that people learn about you. Try to post on LinkedIn. I tried to, I know it's tough. It's always an uncomfortable place to start, but people need to hear you. So just do as much noise as you can, so people want to join your company.
Fantastic, thanks, Leah. Hannah, any tips around the branding piece?
Yeah, I definitely have to echo what Liz just said. I think there's probably a common misconception that as an organization, to get employer branding right in the early days, you have to be super, super active as an organization on social media. And we know just as having a small talent team puts limitations, so does having a small marketing team on what you can do. So often you'll find if you're the lone talent expert within the organization, there's probably an equally small marketing team to support this. There might not be a social media manager, it might be a solo marketing manager. And so probably leading on, I think what Leah said, I think using what your people are saying on social media is a great way to get this out there. So if your people are engaged with you, if your people are active, if they want to go onto their LinkedIn or any of their social platforms and mention and tag your organization name, there is nothing better for gaining a referral than it coming from within that network, because they've already spoken about you. So I definitely think encouraging that kind of employee voice is super, super important. I also think there's a common misconception that this can take loads of money and loads of software, but there's also a ton of other ways that your people can be heard and seen, whether it is them taking part in a webinar, for example, or being on a panel, talking on a podcast, and being active within the social circles and the networks of their niche. I think the more that comes from your employee, particularly in the early stages, the better from an employment brand perspective.
100% agree. Employee application is one of the most organic ways to get the good branding out and good people in. Are you doing anything to encourage them, or how are you encouraging people? Whilst what you want is to be authentic, but how are you encouraging your people to kind of maybe start, just put a tag out about Renko and just say we're good or whatever? How are you doing that?
Yeah, I think it is a tough balance to strike, because you do want it to be organic. You want it to naturally come from them. But sometimes we all know it needs a little bit of a nudge. I think the first and foremost way, again, probably tying in a little bit with what Leah said, is being the example of doing it. So if they're seeing that you're comfortable to talk about your organization and post things about your social or your culture or your hiring or whatever it is, if they're seeing that coming from you, but then also getting key people in the business to do so, it's back to that kind of support network that I talked about in the beginning. If I've got a couple of heads of the C-suite, a couple of directors that I can pull in a favor from, but also if I'm best mates with the new guy, like, I can say, hey, how are you finding it? You've been here a couple of months. Like, do you think other people in your network would want to work here? Like, this is a great way to reach them. I can get them to speak as well by building a relationship with them too. So being the example, having other people that you can kind of call in a favor from to be the example, but then organically hoping that will transpire to all levels of the business from there.
You standing over them at their desk, say, just put a little LinkedIn post out there, just to tag you. You're doing it. They're going that far.
Absolutely, it's like an old Victorian school. I'm standing there with the key every single day. No, absolutely not. I think the other aspect of it is encouraging it when it does happen. So if someone from your organization has posted something, like, engage with it, like it, comment, make sure that they feel good for having done it. Like, there's got to be a feel good factor in it. We all kind of, as humans, instinctively like to be told that something we've done is good. So encouraging it by giving a bit of a pat on the back, by giving a thumbs up, like by commenting and saying, great to hear your opinion, like, that will encourage repeating behavior.
Positive reinforcement. Yeah, absolutely. All for that. Ollie, anything for you in terms of the branding piece?
Could just completely agree with what's been said, to be honest. I think really building relationships internally. And I think that talent obviously sits as a central function within the organization, and utilizing the different skill sets that you've got within the business. So forming a close partnership with marketing to understand how they can support this. A big thing for us was recognizing people internally and spotlighting on people within the organization, whether that be the work they've done, promotions, delivery, a particular milestone. Was there an event from a business standpoint that we wanted to talk about? Really highlighting those things. We did bring in some external support at a point, and then use that as an opportunity to upskill somebody within our direct talent team that had a motivation to go down that route. So using that as a career progression opportunity for somebody internally who's now producing kind of fantastic content across different pillars. Our big pain point was hiring engineers. So we really worked with the engineers to encourage a blog post and build that out. We were seeing that it was getting a huge amount of engagement. So we continue to do that now, really. But touching on what Hannah said, really, you really need to build those relationships internally, show people the value in it. And I think, having the right people in the business that are working towards the goal, especially within a startup, will go above and beyond to amplify kind of the brand. And at the same time, it's people's own personal brand, right? I think it's statistically engagement is better when it comes from an individual's, within the business's account. So it's also that incentive for people within the business to boost their own personal brand within the market, as well as a knock-on for that is also for the business. So really breaking that down as to what the why and how you're going to do it is important. But yeah, I think largely everything was covered by Hannah and Leah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the piece around getting engineers to write blogs and things like that is so important. I think typically when I go into work with businesses, often they're between 20 and 100 people, and very often their websites are tailored purely at their clients or their customers. So it's all about they're targeting their websites at the clients and the customers. Ask what the CEO what the number one problem they've got is. We can't find good people. And this is when we need to change the mindset to actually making sure our website is a shop window not just for our customers but for the people we're looking to attract to the business, and things like blogs, videos about what it's actually like to work here, why I enjoy it, and actually seeing some personability and all this kind of stuff will actually probably help you on the client side as well, by the way. It opens up eyes to what your business is actually like as human beings. It's so important. But I see it so often companies don't put any emphasis on that because they haven't thought about it from that point of view before. Let's talk forecasting and budgets, Ollie. So when we're setting up a talent function, I suppose in your experience, what has been your experience with this actually? Because I suppose I jotted down a question around this, assuming that you've got a budget, and because you may not, you may go into the business and think, okay, you might have to ask, okay, what's my budget here, guys? What's happening? So what's your experience been with budgeting, first of all? And then I suppose how have you managed that forecasting, and what has been the expectancy on you?
Yeah, so I think again, it's certainly the way that anybody wants to come in and have that as a first conversation, so you can kind of build things out from the get-go. But the reality is that there's going to be a huge amount of reactive things, and things needed to be hired yesterday, and there may not be a plan from the beginning. When I joined Runa, we had about 10 roles open, primarily focused on engineering, and we knew that was going to be the priority. As we then evolved as a business, it was a lot around partnering with the finance team and the Exco team to understand what were the specific needs for the business. How were those people going to contribute to the success of the objectives of the organization? How are they going to tie to the OKRs and the overall delivery? And what's the critical need so that you can prioritize those from a capacity standpoint, as well as the quarter in which we're going to hire them. So the two conversations, the actual talent headcount forecasting plan and the budgeting formed as the same conversation. And off the back of that initial conversation, we had bi-weekly, which then evolved to kind of monthly conversations, so that we're regularly checking in on this. Because you have a plan, but then things change, people leave, people get promoted. So you're constantly needing to adapt that. My recommendation is that you've got those regular touch points, you've got that regular cadence of meetings, that you're preparing for things, as best as you can, but knowing that things are going to change. But I think if you can do that, set that expectation throughout a period of the year or 6 months or however long you're planning for, depending on the budget that you've got, and work back from that should set you up for success, because off the back of that you can then plan the headcount within the team accordingly. You can manage the expectations of the hiring managers, it should set you up for success. But I almost stop myself when I'm saying that, because it's such an idealistic way of looking at things, and really, is it ever as clear cut? Certainly not in my experience, but it's part of the fun of being in a startup, right? Things chop and change, you roll with it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ollie. Leah, what's your experience been of forecasting and budgeting, and how's that look for you in recent years?
So way more messy for myself than for Ollie, I think. When I joined Waldo, we didn't have a CFO. We had an amazing CEO and CTO, but they're not CFOs. Sometimes it's very tough, when you raise a lot of money, you have so much cash, what do you have to do? It was also another economic market where we used to, spend so much money all the time. So I guess I was quite lucky to not have too much budget. But what I said is that from day one, I wanted to have advisors and speak to as much people as I could, see what was done in other similar stages startups, to gather as much data as I could, to make sure that I could analyze and see what we could need in terms of talent acquisition, development, retention, and all other relevant HR metrics. And then, as Ollie said, obviously, really engage with stakeholders to me is key. Involve them, the senior leaders, the department heads, finance teams if you have one, and make sure that you're all aligned.
Fantastic, thanks, Leah. And Hannah, finally from you, just on the budgeting and forecasting side, what's it look like for you at Renko or previously?
It's been really varied, and I think the thing that we need to probably accept in any people function, whether it's talent or other elements of people in HR, is that there are just too many variables with people to really forecast exactly. So a lot of this for me is about your attitude to flexibility and adaptability. Losing my ability to speak English now, but I think to both the points of Leah and Ollie, communication is so key on this. If I have a budget which is set up at the beginning of the financial year, it's extremely unlikely that that's going to remain the same throughout, for a number of reasons. We could have a higher turnover than expected. We could have an investment that wasn't anticipated at the beginning of the year. There could be good or bad reasons why it's varied. But if I just work on the basis that that's going to be the same and I silo my workload, then we're not in sync across the business at all. It's about being able to check back in with the financial controller, the CFO, or whatever part of the finance team it is that you work with. That might be monthly in your case. It might be weekly. I don't know, but it could be quarterly. But it's just about having that super clear dialogue and communicating when we think we're not going to be where we anticipated, because there's just too many variables. You can do your best, and I do think it's really important to aspire to have a close and tight budget where possible, and a forecast for your own sanity more than anything else at times from a workload and finance perspective. But it is just so important to recognize that's going to be variable.
Yeah, understood. And I think let's stay with numbers, because I think we probably all agree that in order to be able to influence the people who matter in our business, we want to become as data-driven as possible so we can translate those numbers to facts and to strategies moving forward. For you, Hannah, what are some of the key metrics and indicators that a talent function should be tracking and monitoring to display success and to influence things moving in the future?
So one of the things that I've noticed, and not necessarily just at Renko, but across a number of different businesses that I've been in, is a hiring manager's attitude to kind of interview as many people as possible for the role that they want to fill. And whilst I understand where they come from on that perspective, having a really tight ratio from the number of people that we interview to the number of people we offer and hire is actually much more of a productive way to spend our time and money. But it also means that we're nailing the selection process. So if I'm able to identify the right person by their CV or by whatever the recruiters put forward to me or by initial screening phone call, it's a much more effective use of my time than sitting down and having a 45-minute interview with, for example, 12 candidates if I only want to hire one. So for me, getting that ratio is actually super, super paramount. And that ratio will also tell me a lot about what element I need to fix. If I'm interviewing too many people, is it because the advert is not explaining the job right? Is it because my search parameters are not correct and I'm looking for the wrong person? Is it because I picked the wrong partner? Am I working with an external agency that hasn't understood this and hasn't articulated it right? So I think there are so many things that you can determine from that ratio about where the breakdown in the process is.
Yeah, with you. Thanks, Hannah. Ollie, same question to you.
Yeah, I'd agree with Hannah, really. I think it's about looking at the data and understanding where the blockers are or where you're being restricted in some respects. I mean, the use of data for us was to continue to iterate on the processes that we've got and understand why people. So for us at the early stages, the pass-through rate was the biggest data set that we were looking at, and understanding what our metrics and what our benchmarks were for each of those. So if something was going under a certain percentage, we'd dive into that data. We'd understand why, was there any trends in terms of why people weren't moving forward during the process, and then analyzing it. And what we found was a couple of things. One of which was we weren't giving people enough kind of content or managing expectations during that interview. We weren't giving them enough to enable them to show up properly. So we made some changes there. The other was introducing the bar raiser framework. So we were continually upskilling people. But for me, the metrics are really defined by the problem that you've got. For us, it was on the pass-through rate. And then on the other aspects, we may look at kind of the time to hire, for example. Are we optimizing our process enough, which we weren't at a point? By combining stages, by reducing time between stages, we were able to optimize that, which meant we can solve the problem of hiring people, the best people, but quickly at the same time. So I think there's always going to be predefined metrics and predefined KPIs within the talent world, but each business will have specific needs and each business will have a problem they need to solve, and identifying what that is, measuring the existing data point against the future data point is how you're going to make quite a big difference.
Got you. Thanks, Ollie. And Leah, anything to add on the metrics that are important to you, or is it all customizable based on the business?
I would say some key metrics that I always keep in mind are definitely, time to fill a role, sourcing channel effectiveness, the quality of hire, the turnover, the cost per hire as well, obviously, referral rates. These are to me the most important, and then you can track so many things. I feel like tracking metrics is definitely key, but sometimes you can also get lost in your Excel or your softwares, and you always want to prove things. I think key metrics are definitely important, but you also need to keep the flow going, trust yourself, trust your team, and yeah.
Just to add to that, I think what Leah mentioned there is something that would be consistent across any business is obviously the quality of hire, and how you measure that. Because everything else, time to hire, time to fill, time to source, all of that is really irrelevant if your quality of hire isn't at the isn't kind of top of mind, really.
Couldn't have planned that better, because next week's webinar is purely on quality of hire. So we're going to be doing a full conversation around that. So if you're intrigued to find out how and what we should be doing around qualitative hire, please tune in for that. Final question then, I suppose, just to put a bow around this conversation for all the panels. So Hannah, we'll go to you. If you're as a talent and people expert, what's the top line advice you give to somebody who's kind of walking into this situation? They've got all these things to think about. It's overwhelming. They needed to set up a talent function from scratch. What's the things that would stand out for you?
I think we've talked on a number of different topics here about the word priority, and if you're one person, there is a limit to what you can do. So I think understanding a really fundamental difference between what is urgent and what is important is really key, because you can find yourself becoming a busy idiot because something lands and it needs a response right away, whereas something genuinely important is waiting in the background. So I think learning how to identify what's urgent versus what's important is a really, really great way of being able to balance that incredibly chaotic workload that can come from kind of being a standalone individual in this function. But it was one of the first things that I said when we started talking today. I still stand by choosing the right partners, like internally, externally, having the right support network to deliver this for me is key.
Absolutely. Lay that groundwork. Absolutely with you. Leah, same question to you. What's the kind of top line final piece of advice for somebody walking into a situation like this?
Totally agree with Hannah. Prioritize is key. You cannot do everything all the time. Chase excellence, but not perfection. Again, do as best as you can, but again, nobody is perfect. And if you're the sole talent expert in your company, just do your best. I think this is key. And as Anna said, get support externally, internally, get agencies to help you on sourcing, on having candidates, on as much software as we can. And obviously internally as well, get support from your co-founders, the leaders, the hiring managers, all the interviewers, to make sure that everyone becomes a talent expert in the company.
Lovely. Thanks, Leah. Final question. Same to you, Ollie.
I guess I can only summarize what Hannah and Leah said, but I think the headline for me is that it's hard work, and it can be overwhelming, but you're in that role for a reason, and I think kind of trust in the process that has got you to that position. Prioritize and build trust with the people within the business, both now and moving forward. But I think that's a big emphasis. That just, again, I suppose it's just summarizing, but try and plan as far ahead as possible, if possible, and spend time analyzing data. But before you do that, validate that data and make sure that it's accurate and it's the right stuff. It's a great journey. Like it's a really cool journey to kind of be going on and continue on, and so it's a lot of fun. So embrace it. It'll be a fun journey.
Enjoy yourself. That's the most important thing, isn't it? Enjoy
Exactly
yourself. Exactly. Perfect. Look, thank you so much. So as Ollie perfectly teed us up with the cliffhanger, next week, quality of hires will be what we're talking about. So please do join us for that. But Ollie, Hannah and Leah, thank you so much for your expert advice today and for being a part of Talent and Growth.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye.
See you.